Opening one more clinic is a project. Opening the next 3 to 10 is a system. Most owners never make that switch. If you want to open 10 clinics over the next 5 years or 3 years, it all starts with a plan. I promise you that. I can remember back when we had 3 clinics and we had 3 owners. So we each essentially opened our own clinic and took all the responsibility, but there was no system. There was no real plan. And in the year 1993, we decided that we wanted to build our company from 3 clinics to 20 clinics. That required a plan. And what I want to talk to you about today is the plan that we developed and that we have developed for hundreds of physical therapy business owners. Many of them now have exceeded 20, 30, 40, 50 clinics. And how we walk through new startups so that it becomes a system, not just your next clinic. And as I said, starts with a plan. Now, this plan needs to be constructed so that there's alignment with your leaders as well as your staff. This can't be something you go into a closet and you develop, and then you're trying to come back to your staff and kind of jam this thing down their throat, okay? You need alignment with your leaders and your staff. And the big piece of that plan is really getting an idea of, first of all, as we're going to go through today, what are all the steps that it's going to take to get to that next startup? And then where's the capital that we're going to need if we want to do 2 startups this year or 3 startups this year? I can tell you that when we began in 1993 and developed our plan was to do 4 startups and 1 acquisition per year over the next 3 years, which would have gotten us somewhere in the range of 18 to 22 clinics. But it was planned out with every step. Who's responsible? Who's responsible for initiating those steps, completing those steps to get to those new startup clinics? I often describe a plan as, look, if you want to drive from, right now I'm in New Jersey and our office is here in New Jersey. If I want to drive to California to go visit my son and daughter-in-law, I'm not going to just get in the car and start driving. I need a plan to get there. I need a roadmap to get there. That's what a plan typically does for most owners who are looking to grow to multiple clinics. It gives them that map. And then you can go back to that map. If you get off track, you go back to that map and you get back on track. Okay, so another quick description of it that I use often is, do you all remember UHF TV? Remember as a young person watching TV and it was all fuzzy and you could barely see the picture? Click a button, it goes to high definition. That's what a plan can do for you. So again, starts with a plan. I can't tell you that enough, that without that written plan, you're going to be stuck in the mud. All right, next, the research. You have to do the research in order to know where the next geography is, town is for your next startup. We call this the Olympic ring to new startups, because what we find is that there's an intersection between physician referral sources and patients, and that intersection moving out to that next clinic tends to be the best location for that clinic. Here's the research. You have to do an analysis of your physicians and a mapping of your physicians and how many referrals have they sent you over the last month, 6 months, year. What is the referral stream from your physicians and where are they around you? If we'll just start this with 1 clinic, where are they around that clinic? Where are those referral sources? Next is your patients. What is the zip codes where your patients live around your current existing clinic? And what are you looking for? You're looking for markets where there are a high number of referral sources, but a low number of patients that have been willing to drive to your current location. Once you can find that intersection, once you can find that dynamic in a market, that's when you can then look at a map with those dots, physicians, referrals, and you can create what would be the next 3 towns, locations for you to open your next clinic. Okay, now, of course, we're going to then do some background on those towns. What are the demographics in those towns? You know, you already know what physicians are in those towns, but what are the demographics? What do the schools look like? Are there hospitals nearby, et cetera, et cetera. From there, we're going to then run the analysis on those locations to discern, let's just say we pick 3. What's the best location of those 3 based on the analysis? And the way we do that is we look then at physician referral sources, but now we're getting very granular in those physician referral sources. We're really looking at who are those physicians? What kind of relationship do we have with those physicians? What is the demographic of the town in terms of growth year over year? What is the demographics in terms of age range? All looking towards what works for our business. Now, if you're a pediatric business, obviously that's different than if you're a sports medicine, you're running sports. Are the high schools? Where are the high schools? Where are there physicians in that market that would refer to you if you were in the sports mode? So we run that analysis and we determine then down to what is the number 1 market, the number 2, and the number 3. All right, so we have 3 then, and we've run the analysis in all 3, and we've ranked based on proximity of these referral sources, as well as the patients that we're not willing to drive, as well as now, who are those physician referral sources, and what would then deem to be the next best market for us to be in. All right, this is step number 4. Go live in that market. And I'm not kidding. I had a friend and a colleague. He was in the Pittsburgh area, and he did so well by finding locations where he believed that next best startup would occur. And then he would literally tell his wife that he was going to go and live in that market, even if it was 5 miles away. He's going to wake up in a hotel room. He's going to visit, and this is what you would be doing. You'd be visiting physicians for sure. You would be visiting schools. You would be visiting municipalities. You'd be visiting churches. You would be visiting any stores or restaurants or places where you believe that potential patients for your next clinic would be. And competition. This is when you run that analysis in the last step and you've mapped out where the competition is, this is when you do drive-bys on those competitions. I'm not telling you to walk into the clinic, but if you drive by and kind of peer into the window as you drive by, you can tell if that is a thriving clinic or if it is a clinic that is starving for patients. In that analysis, we would also want to do a market share analysis, right? So when you then go live in the market, you're going to know what's the available market share in the market that you are now living in for a few days to best understand where you're going to put your next clinic. This is important. You're going to make an investment. Typically for a new startup clinic, it's an investment anywhere from, on the real low end, $50,000, on the high end, $150,000. So you're going to be making this investment. You want to really know this market. Now, once you've gone and you've lived in that market, if the first market you go live in doesn't feel right, the physician referral sources that you're meeting with do not seem to be as committed as you thought they may be. They may not have patients in that market of which you may have thought they had patients in that market. They may have patients where your current clinic is, and that's why you're seeing so many of their referral sources. So you really have to determine from living in that market, and that's when it goes from the science to the gut. Okay, we don't start with the gut. We start with the science. If you start with the gut, you're going to do a startup in the wrong place. Start with the science. Start with the analysis. Once you go and live in one market, maybe two, maybe even three, then your gut feel is going to be a really good indicator of where the next best clinic is for you and your business. It gets easier from here, okay? Because now what we have to do is we have to create an operations and a growth model for this clinic. And the way in which we do that is we're making some inferences from the physicians that you've gone to meet with, as well as other referral sources. You need a list of 10 to 20 referral sources and how many referrals you think they're going to send your clinic per week, per month, per year. Once you have that, you can then lean on your operations. How many visits for each new patient? What's your charge and your cash per visit? Typically in your space models, how many patients can you see a week? Can you see a month? And can you see a year? And what you're going to do is you're going to map out the first 6 to 18 months of your new clinic, starting with how many referrals, month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4, going down to how much cash are you going to collect? How much profit are you going to have? What we typically will say is that for a new clinic, if somewhere between 6 to 9 months, the bottom line net income, that's your profit, on a monthly basis goes from red, which is a loss, to green. That's typically what you want to be mapping out. Then at that, call it 12 to 18 month, you want to be looking at one of those months we should start repaying, whether we took a loan or we took it from our cash, we should be repaying for the clinic that we started, the capital that we invested in that clinic. So by the 1.5 to 2 year mark, you have already repaid the loan that you took and or the capital that you took for your company in order to then be able to go on to the next new clinic. That's how one clinic turns to 3 and turns to 10. And if we continue to cycle this, we can open 3 to 5 clinics in a year. It can happen. All right, let's just talk really briefly about the space, all right? We typically find space in medical complexes is a really good idea. It's not going to get you as much visual drive-by traffic, but remember, as a physical therapy patient, it more likely is a destination. We do also find that storefront locations also will work on a main street or on a street that there's lots of traffic. Sometimes that gets a little more expensive. But again, looking at your model, you've now created that operations and growth model. You should know what you're able to afford to do in terms of space. I would strongly suggest that you lease space. You don't buy space unless you have a real estate company in a different company, and that real estate company is very, very profitable. I will tell you day in and day out, a clinic that you can grow for 3 years will give you 5 times the return that a building will give you over a 3-year time frame. And what you don't want to do is tie up your capital buying buildings. Now, in terms of space size, we typically look at somewhere around 15 to 2,500 square feet is a really good sweet spot. And I say that at 2,500 square feet, we usually have a metric that we utilize. If you take 15% of that, of 2,500, that's about 375, which is 375 visits per week that you can do in a 2,500 square foot. I think you can push it to 400 visits a week. And so you're talking about a clinic that would be on a pace to do somewhere close to 20,000 visits in a year. Depending upon your cash per visit, you can do the math on what your revenues would be. That is plenty large enough for a clinic. I think many times business owners, especially if you're doing multiple clinics, will get into much too large of a space for the market and for the market share that they're going to be able to take. That can run into problems down the road. You always want to look at a clinic and say, once this clinic matures, your leasing cost should be somewhere under 10% of your revenues. So if it's $1 million revenue, your clinic cost lease should be under $100,000 a year. That's kind of a rule of thumb we've given. All right, once you've chosen your space, look, we love space where, there's lots of drive-by. Sometimes that's not possible depending upon where you are and depending upon your geography. But a suitable space, once you have that space, now you have timing to when your clinic will open. And I strongly suggest heavy pre-marketing. You and your staff have to be out in that market, talking to physicians, talking to referral sources, giving them that date that you're going to open. And I also strongly recommend an event that states that you're opening. You are going to invite everybody in the community, municipalities, folks from school, coaches, athletic trainers, as well as physicians to that pre-opening event. And that's part of that startup capital that you're going to have. So that way, on day one in your new clinic, what do you have? You have a line going out the door of patients that want to come to your next clinic. That's how you make one new clinic turn into 3, turn into 10. We've done this process over and over again, and we'd love to help you. So I appreciate your time today, and I look forward to talking to you in the very near future.